Harry Truman. The bomb. Twice. Let's start with Hiroshima, because it's impossible not to. August 6th, 1945. The bomb hits at 8:15 in the morning, when the city is full of civilians heading to work and school. The temperature at ground zero reaches 7,000 degrees Fahrenheit. People within half a mile are vaporized. Not killed, vaporized, leaving only shadows burned into concrete. 3 days later, Truman drops a second bomb on Nagasaki. Another 40,000 dead in the first minutes. The combined death toll reaches somewhere between 130,000 and 226,000 people, the vast majority of them civilians. Truman's argument was that the bombs forced Japan's surrender and prevented a land invasion that would have killed even more people. Estimates range from 250,000 to over 1 million Allied casualties. Military historians still debate those numbers. What's less debated is this. By August 1945, Japan's navy was destroyed, its air force was nearly gone, and senior Japanese officials had already opened back-channel surrender negotiations through the Soviet Union. Several of Truman's own military advisors, including Eisenhower, Leahy, and MacArthur, later said the bombs weren't militarily necessary. Under international law as it existed even then, deliberately targeting civilian populations was prohibited. Truman knew both bombs would hit cities, not military installations. He chose to drop them anyway. History gave him the benefit of the doubt. The people of Hiroshima and Nagasaki didn't get a vote. Dwight Eisenhower. The Coup Factory. Eisenhower never put American troops in a major ground war. He's remembered as the steady, grandfatherly president who warned about the military-industrial complex in his farewell speech. What's less remembered is that his administration specialized in a different kind of intervention, one with a much lower profile and a much longer shadow. Iran's democratically elected Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh nationalizes the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, which means the British and Americans lose their cut of Iranian oil. The CIA, under Eisenhower's authorization, organizes Operation Ajax, a coup that removes Mossadegh from power, installs the Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi as a US-backed autocrat, and creates a secret police force called SAVAK that will spend the next 25 years torturing political dissidents. The CIA later acknowledged the operation as a clear act of foreign interference. Iran has not forgotten. The 1979 revolution, the hostage crisis, 4 decades of hostility between the US and Iran, the thread runs directly back to 1953. A year later, 1954. Guatemala. President Jacobo Arbenz begins a land reform program that threatens United Fruit Company, an American corporation with significant ties to the Eisenhower administration, including Secretary of State John Foster Dulles and CIA Director Allen Dulles, who both had personal financial connections to the company. The CIA organizes Operation P BSU CCESS, a coup that overthrows Arbenz and installs a military dictatorship. What follows is 36 years of civil war and state-sponsored massacre. The UN later estimated 200,000 Guatemalans were killed during that period, the vast majority by US-backed governments. The operation itself was declassified in 1999. The State Department called it a significant chapter in the Cold War. That's one way to put it. Lyndon Johnson. The Gulf of Tonkin. Here's where it gets really dark. August 2nd, 1964. The USS Maddox, a US destroyer operating in the Gulf of Tonkin off the coast of North Vietnam, reports being attacked by North Vietnamese torpedo boats. 2 days later, there's a second reported attack. Johnson uses both incidents to push Congress for the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, authorization to escalate U.S. military involvement in Vietnam without a formal declaration of war. Congress passes it nearly unanimously. Within a year, 185,000 American troops are in Vietnam. The problem is the second attack never happened. The crew of the Maddox said so. The Secretary of Defense at the time, Robert McNamara, later admitted it in his memoirs. Declassified NSA documents released in 2005 confirmed that the signal's intelligence had been deliberately misrepresented. Johnson knew the evidence was shaky the night it happened. He told an aide, privately, "Those dumb, stupid sailors were probably just shooting at flying fish." Then he went on television and told the American public they'd been attacked. Then he asked Congress for war powers. What followed? 58,000 Americans killed, somewhere between 1.5 and 3.5 million Vietnamese, Cambodian, and Laotian civilians dead from bombs, napalm, and combat. Numbers that are still contested precisely because the U.S. didn't count civilian deaths in any systematic way. The My Lai Massacre, where U.S. soldiers killed between 347 and 504 unarmed Vietnamese civilians, including women and children, in March of 1968, that happened on Johnson's watch. Under the military culture his escalation created, one officer was convicted. He served 3 years of house arrest. Johnson chose not to run for re-election in 1968. He died in 1973, 4 days before the Paris Peace Accords were signed. Richard Nixon, the Secret War. Johnson started Vietnam. Nixon promised to end it. What he actually did was expand it into 2 additional countries without telling Congress or the American public. Nixon authorizes Operation Menu, a classified sustained bombing campaign against North Vietnamese supply lines running through Cambodia. Over the next 14 months, B-52 bombers fly 3,630 missions and drop 110,000 tons of bombs on Cambodia. The operation is so secret that the Air Force falsifies its mission reports to make it look like the planes never crossed the Cambodian border. When the New York Times breaks the story in 1969, Nixon orders wiretaps on the journalists and his own staff to find the leak. The bombing continues anyway, and it's not just Cambodia. Nixon and National Security Advisor Henry Kissinger also greenlight a covert operation in Chile, backing a military coup against democratically elected socialist President Salvador Allende in September 1973. Allende dies during the coup, and General Augusto Pinochet takes power. What follows is 17 years of military dictatorship in which an estimated 3,000 people are killed and over 28,000 are tortured. The CIA's role was declassified in 2000. Kissinger, who coordinated much of the operation and told Nixon that the U.S. couldn't let Chile go communist due to its own stupidity, was never charged with anything. He continued to serve as a respected foreign policy elder statesman until his death in 2023 at age 100, which, and I say this as a factual observation, struck a lot of people as deeply unfair. The Cambodian campaign destabilizes the government of Prince Norodom Sihanouk, contributes directly to the rise of the Khmer Rouge, and sets the stage for a genocide that will kill an estimated 1.7 to 2.5 million Cambodians between 1975 and 1979. Scholars still debate how much causal weight to assign to the bombing campaign versus other factors. What's not debated is that Nixon bombed a neutral country in secret, falsified military records to cover it up, helped topple another democracy on a different continent, and then resigned from office before any of it could catch up with him legally. Under the War Powers Act, which Congress passed in 1973, specifically in response to the Cambodia bombing, what he did would have been illegal even by U.S. law. He died in 1994 with a full state funeral. Ronald Reagan, Iran-Contra, and El Salvador. The 1980s had a theme. If a government anywhere in Latin America looked like it might lean left, the Reagan administration found a way to arm, fund, or support whoever was fighting against it, regardless of what those groups were doing to civilians. El Salvador, 1981. The Salvadoran military, trained and funded by the United States, massacres approximately 800 to 1,000 civilians in the town of El Mozote over 3 days. Men, women, children. The evidence was reported by journalists on the ground within weeks. The Reagan administration told Congress the Salvadoran government was making progress on human rights. They were legally required to certify this every 6 months to keep the aid flowing. They certified it repeatedly. The State Department actively worked to discredit the journalists who reported the massacre, calling their accounts not credible, despite the bodies still being in the ground. The massacre wasn't officially acknowledged by the Salvadoran government until 1992. U.S. involvement in training the officers responsible was documented years later in declassified cables. Then there's Iran-Contra. Reagan publicly vows never to negotiate with terrorists after Iran takes American hostages. Privately, his administration sells weapons to Iran. Yes, that Iran, the one holding the hostages, and uses the profits to fund the Contra rebels in Nicaragua, bypassing a congressional ban on exactly that kind of funding. When it unravels in 1986, 11 administration officials are convicted. Reagan claims he didn't know. Whether or not that's true, the Contras, funded by his administration, carried out documented atrocities against Nicaraguan civilians throughout the conflict. A UN-backed Truth Commission later cataloged the killings. The convictions were mostly overturned on appeal or pardoned by the first President Bush. And then there's Afghanistan, where Reagan's CIA funneled roughly $3 billion to Mujahideen fighters battling the Soviet Union. including to commanders who would later form the backbone of the Taliban and provide cover for al-Qaeda. At the time, the logic was straightforward. The enemy of my enemy. The long-term math on that one took about 20 years to fully arrive. George H.W. Bush. The Highway of Death. The Gulf War is usually remembered as a clean, decisive, well-executed military operation. 42 days. Minimal U.S. casualties. Saddam pushed out of Kuwait. Mission accomplished. February 26, 1991. Iraqi forces are withdrawing from Kuwait along Highway 80, a multi-lane road running north toward Basra. U.S. forces intercept the convoy and begin attacking it from the air. What follows is hours of sustained bombing on a column that includes military vehicles, but also civilian cars, trucks, and buses. Kuwaitis, Palestinians, Iraqi civilians caught in the retreat. The highway becomes a graveyard. Burned vehicles and bodies stretch for miles. Journalists who reach the scene in the days after describe it as a turkey shoot. The military argued the convoy was a legitimate military target because it included Iraqi soldiers and military equipment. Human rights organizations argued that attacking a retreating force mixed with civilians over a sustained period constituted a violation of the laws of war. Bush ordered a ceasefire 100 hours after the ground offensive began, often credited as a restrained, proportionate decision. The timing of that ceasefire is also when the Highway of Death attack stopped. The official U.S. position has always been that the operation was lawful. The images from that highway made a lot of people wonder. Bill Clinton, Rwanda, and the Sudan bombing. Clinton's presidency has two moments that, taken together, say something uncomfortable about how American power decides when civilian lives matter. April 1994. Rwanda. Over 100 days, somewhere between 500,000 and 800,000 Tutsi civilians are killed in a genocide carried out by Hutu extremists. The killings are happening in real time. The UN force commander on the ground, Canadian General Romeo Dallaire, is sending urgent cables to the UN asking for authorization to intervene. The Clinton administration, still stung by the Black Hawk Down disaster in Somalia 5 months earlier, instructs its UN ambassador to avoid using the word genocide in official statements, because using the word would legally obligate a response. Clinton later calls Rwanda the biggest regret of his presidency. He visited in 1998 and apologized. The people who died didn't get to hear it. August 20th, 1998. 3 days after Clinton's testimony about Monica Lewinsky, the U.S. launches cruise missiles at a pharmaceutical factory in Khartoum, Sudan, claiming it produces chemical weapons precursors for al-Qaeda. The factory, Al-Shifa, produces about half of Sudan's pharmaceutical supply. Antibiotics, malaria medication. No chemical weapons evidence is ever publicly confirmed. An estimated tens of thousands of Sudanese civilians die in the years following from preventable diseases as a result of the pharmaceutical shortage. The Clinton administration never acknowledged any civilian harm. The timing of the strike, 3 days after a major political scandal, was noticed by pretty much everyone. George W. Bush, Iraq, and the legal architecture of torture. September 11, 2001 changes everything, and the legal memos start almost immediately. By 2002, the Bush administration's Office of Legal Counsel has produced what become known as the torture memos, legal opinions arguing that enhanced interrogation techniques, including waterboarding, sleep deprivation, stress positions, and confinement in small boxes, don't constitute torture under U.S. or international law. Those memos are used to authorize a program that the Senate Intelligence Committee later documents in exhaustive, classified detail. A program that included rectal feeding used as a means of control, mock executions, and at least one prisoner who died of hypothermia while chained to a concrete floor. CIA officials told the White House the techniques were producing actionable intelligence. The Senate report found that claim to be largely unsupported. No senior official was prosecuted. Then there's Iraq. March 2003. The Bush administration tells the public, the UN, and Congress that Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction and ties to al-Qaeda. The weapons don't exist. The al-Qaeda connection doesn't hold up. The invasion goes ahead. By the time U.S. troops withdraw in 2011, somewhere between 100,000 and 600,000 Iraqi civilians are dead, depending on whose methodology you trust. The Lancet study puts the number at the high end, Iraq body count puts it lower, and the U.S. government never kept an official count. Abu Ghraib, the systematic abuse and humiliation of Iraqi detainees by U.S. soldiers, documented in hundreds of photographs, becomes the image that defines the occupation for much of the world. 11 low-ranking soldiers are convicted. The senior officials who built the legal framework that enabled it are not. Barack Obama. The drone program. Obama ran on ending the Bush-era wars. He withdrew troops from Iraq and wound down the Afghanistan surge. He also dramatically escalated a program that kills people by remote control, with very little transparency and even less accountability. The drone strike program under Obama expanded from roughly 50 strikes in his first year to over 500 by his final year in office. The strikes hit Pakistan, Yemen, Somalia, and Libya. The Bureau of Investigative Journalism, which tracked the strikes independently, documented between 384 and 807 civilian deaths from drone strikes in Pakistan alone during the Obama years, with the caveat that the actual number is almost certainly higher because the U.S. government counted any military-age male in a strike zone as a combatant unless proven otherwise after death. That policy, which leaked in 2012, was called the disposition matrix. It meant that a man in his 20s standing near a suspected militant was, by definition, an acceptable casualty. In 2011, Obama orders the killing of Anwar al-Awlaki, an American citizen, by drone strike in Yemen. No trial, no charges formally filed in a public court. A U.S. citizen killed by his own government on the president's order. 2 weeks later, a separate strike kills al-Awlaki's 16-year-old son, also an American citizen, who was eating dinner with his cousins. The administration said he wasn't the target. When asked about his son's death, administration officials told a reporter the boy should have had a more responsible father. He was 16 years old. Donald Trump. Mosul and the Saudi arms deal. Trump inherited the drone program and loosened the rules around it, reducing the requirements for high-level sign-off and expanding the definition of permissible strike zones. Civilian casualty reports from Syria and Yemen climbed in 2017 and 2018. The Pentagon's own Inspector General documented reporting failures in cases where civilian deaths weren't properly investigated. But the clearest case is the campaign to retake Mosul from ISIS in 2017. The battle lasted 9 months. U.S.-led coalition airstrikes, combined with Iraqi ground forces, generated civilian casualty numbers that the Associated Press estimated at over 9,000 in the city alone, with the majority of deaths in one neighborhood, Al-Jadida, where a single March 2017 airstrike killed somewhere between 105 and 278 civilians sheltering in a basement. The military's initial investigation concluded the strike was within the rules of engagement. Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International documented it as a potential war crime. No charges were filed. Trump also approved a massive arms sale to Saudi Arabia, worth over $110 billion, while Saudi Arabia was conducting airstrikes in Yemen that killed thousands of civilians, including a 2018 bus strike that killed 40 children. The U.S. provided refueling support and targeting assistance to the Saudi coalition throughout much of this period. Congress passed a resolution to end U.S. military support for the Yemen war in 2019. Trump vetoed it.